Hey, what's up guys? My name is Sal, and this is another expedition log. Today, I'd like you to come take a walk with me through the Century 3 Mall on a grand adventure. I intend to show you every part of this beautiful yet blemished mall in extremis. This mall is at its point of death, and we begin the journey down this section of abandoned road leading to the mall's parking structure. I've spared no detail in collecting the footage for this episode, and this episode will be a long one. So grab a drink, get a bite to eat, and come take a walk with me through the Century 3 Mall. These label scars are the first indication that you'll see upon approaching the Century 3 Mall as to what the inside really looks like. The inside, as you've probably seen in many other videos, is in pretty good shape, but the structure is falling apart. And just take this parking structure, for example. It's in such horrible, terrible disrepair. I've looked all over the internet, and I've asked a bunch of friends what that black discoloration might be. And from what everybody's telling me is that it's most likely black mold. Look at the surfaces, it's disgusting. All of the black discoloration you're seeing is most likely black mold. It looks terrible, but more importantly, it's a public safety issue because anybody can just walk up to this mall. I didn't open any doors or fences or anything. This was just readily accessible. There were no signs saying that I couldn't enter this part. I just walked up to it. And now we're starting to get our first glimpse of the boards up on the doors and just the massive amounts of graffiti. This parking garage is what I really wanted to see the first time I was here, but I had to wait a little bit, and this is the shape that it's in. Expedition log number 14, which was part 1 of my coverage on Century 3, ended with an incredibly brief look at the Sears concourse as security spotted me, at which point I went outside to explore the parking structure, only to have my car surrounded by the security guards, which was my cue to leave. We didn't see much of the garage in part 1, nor did we see any of the hidden wing, or really any of the courtyard where Sears and Ward's intersect. In this episode, we're going to walk through all of the areas of Century 3, both closed off and open. I would also like to take a slight philosophical journey with you to posit exactly why urban explorers feel the need and desire to mount expeditions to areas less traveled by common folk, and what draws us in. Before we get into them all, a word from my sponsor for this video, the incredible acting chops and impressions of Hallie Eisenberg from 1999.
What do you have, folks? A large pepperoni pizza.
And a Pepsi, please.
A Pepsi. Sure thing, Curly. Here you go, Cupcake.
Thank you.
Hey, come here. I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm going to tell you. We both know I ordered a Pepsi Cola. And now you've insulted me and my entire family by offering me this, whatever it is. For being a civilized person, I'd like to give you a chance to make amends. Capiche? Yeah. Here you go.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Century 3 Mall. We're about to get into the mall guts. This was during the inaugural Dead Mall Summit, which the Discord server put together, and there's a link to that server in the description below. So if you'd like to join, just go ahead and click the link and then hit up a mod, and we can get you rolled up for the server. So right now I'm in the mall guts with Anthony from Faded Commerce, and we're looking for a way to get to the 3rd floor. Now, I covered the complete history of the Century 3 Mall in episode 14 of the Expedition Log series, but I'd like to just clear something up, so I'll just talk about the opening of the mall. Eddie DeBartolo opened the mall in 1979 and ushered in the 3rd centennial of the United States of America. 1776 to 1876 was the 1st century, 1876 to 1976 was the 2nd century, and the 3rd century would occur between 1976 and 2076, for which the mall was named Century 3. I was unclear in part 1 when I said that they were celebrating the 3rd centennial, because it obviously hasn't happened yet. That happens in 2076. They were ushering that in. We were celebrating the promise, 1976 to 2076. And I'd like to just give a quick shout out to the Dead Malls of Discord family. The family's been growing larger and larger every day, but the official creators that are a part of the family are myself, Jack over at deadmalls.com, Nick from the Caldor Rainbow, Ron and Kristen from Unicom Productions, Adam from the Vintage Spaces, Ashley, who is the Neon Explorer on Instagram, go check her out, Pat and Heather from Raw and Real Retail, Anthony, with whom I'm exploring here right now from Faded Commerce, John Rev, and Ace from Ace's Adventures. All of us are on the Discord. So again, if you'd like to join, just go ahead and hit the link in the description below, and you'll need to hit up a moderator so that you can get a role. I'd like to introduce you all to the 3rd floor of Century 3 Mall.
Installed central air conditioning. Get 0% finance charge, no billing, and no payments until August with the Sears Charge Home Improvement Plan. Call now for a free in-home estimate on a Kenmore air conditioning system. State-of-the-art engineering means greater energy efficiency. A new Kenmore could save 10 to 44% on your annual cooling costs. In time, even pay for itself. Sears also offers fast emergency installation, a 5-year warranty on parts and labor, plus our satisfaction guarantee. And you know Sears will be there to back it up. Get 0% finance charge, no billing, no payments until August. Offer ends May 31st, so call now and save with Sears.
So what's the paper say about tomorrow?
Another scorcher.
Cool.
The footage that you're seeing here has been shot over the last year, in 2018, over many, many visits. You might see some slight visual discrepancies from shot to shot, such as planters appearing in one view and suddenly gone in the next, trees that are there and not in the next shot. And I'm certainly not trying to deceive any of you, but rather, I'd like to just show you all of the angles that I possibly can using the footage that I gathered across several trips in 2018. I took a fascination with urban exploring quite some time ago. I would go out into the woods and try and find abandoned places with my buddies, but I never filmed any of that. It was just pure curiosity. And then when I found Dan Bell's channel, the interest really kicked into high gear because I learned that people were gathering and doing this, that there were more people out there that were doing it. And since then, I've wondered why, what draws us to that, and if this is a new thing or not. So since I already discussed the history of this mall in part 1 in episode 14 of the ExLog series, in this episode I'd like to discuss two things with you if you'll indulge me. The first of which is, where did malls come from? I'd like to just briefly touch on some really early markets that then laid the groundwork for malls, but then I'd like to discuss some philosophy that dates back to the 19th century. Namely, I'd like to discuss the philosophy of Charles Beaudelaire, who then influenced other people like Walter Benjamin in the 20th century. So where did malls come from? Why do we have them? The very first shopping malls of the world were called arcades, which were based upon early covered markets which date all the way back to ancient Rome. The earliest marketplace known is most likely Trajan's Market, which was built around 100 to 110 CE by Apollodorus of Damascus, who laid the groundwork for what malls would eventually become. In 1628, La Marché des Enfants Rouges opened as a rudimentary covered market in Paris, with others opening over the next few decades. The Oxford Covered Market opened in 1774 in Oxford, England. But then, during the mid-18th century, construction began on the first massive indoor shopping complex. Started in 1757 and completed in 1785, the 570,000 square foot Gostiny Dvor opened in St. Petersburg, Russia. The structure was of neoclassical design, with giant columns and almost of a brutalist nature, if not for all the filigree around the arches and sconces. The plans were submitted by Jean-Baptiste Vaillant de la Motte. The arcade had over 100 shops, and despite being structurally damaged during World War II, it still exists as a shopping center in its original location today.
Is brought to you by the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The hottest games and the coolest place to play them. No wonder you find the best play here.
Before Nintendo came out with Super Metroid, we wanted to make sure it was the most intense Metroid battle ever. So we thought we'd see how killer gear would fare against it. Ready, boys? That's 24 max for the weapons, world, and weirdos old killers up against Nintendo's biggest game ever. Crispy, boy. He can handle it. Well, let's see how we did. Ship it! Super Metroid, only on the Super NES.
So while we were here, this was during the summit, the heat was incredibly hot, and it was during the summer. So outside it was like 80, 90 degrees, and in here, the heat was blasting, and it was so hot. And there were birds flying all over the mall. I couldn't capture any of them, they were actually going pretty quick, but if you look, you'll see bird poop all over the place. The mall was just incredibly caked. The third floor had just bird droppings all over the railings, and it was really disgusting. But of course that didn't stop us from traversing every single part of this mall so that we can show you guys. Just look at some of these views. This mall just looks so massive, and yet there's malls out there that are a lot bigger than this. But the grand columns and the huge features of this mall, and all the crosswalks and the courtyards and the concourses meeting here and there, this mall has such beautiful architecture, and it just saddens me to know that there's just nothing happening with it. Episode 35 in the ExLog series covers a brief history of Sears as a company, and also we get a tour inside of that Sears. Now, at the time, I do believe that there was a way to get into the Macy's, but it wasn't safe and I wasn't going to try. However, there are a few channels that did cover the inside of Macy's, one of which was Ace's Adventures. So all of you should go check that video out now. Ace has really good coverage of that Macy's, and his video is really fantastic. But we didn't go inside of any of the department stores on this day. But again, if you want to check out episode 35, I get inside the Sears with Wally B, Faded Commerce, and Jack Thomas of deadmalls.com. We're now on the second floor of the mall at the Sears concourse. And this is where part 1 ended, because I saw security and I scurried off. But of course I'm here with no ill intentions, and I'm just here capturing the memory of the mall and archiving it for future generations. So I was able to really take my time and look at a lot of the details on the second floor here. And the architecture of this mall really is stunning, despite it being flawed with all the stains in the carpet and everything else. If you can look past that and really imagine what this mall was like back in the day, it's truly amazing. You can see several points in the masonry where the structure is cracking. And when you think about why is this cracking, it's not like somebody took a sledgehammer to it. The fact is, this mall was built on top of an unstable foundation of slag. The slag was what flowed down the slag heap from that mountain that's in back of the mall. And it was in a molten form, and then it settled where the mall is now. And it's incredibly unstable, and it shifts, causing the foundation to crack in certain parts, which is what we're seeing. This foundation has caused the mall to shift and sway over the years, and has caused vulnerabilities and frankly a lack of structural integrity, leading to unsafe conditions decades after construction. I'm not sure if Eddie DeBartolo got a break on the location here, but I can't think of another reason why you would build a mall on top of slag. Century 3 used to have red carpet all throughout the mall. I'm pretty sure it was there as recently as the early aughts. Maybe 2006? I'm not sure. If you know, leave a comment below and let me know. But this section right here is my most favorite part of any mall that is still standing today. These used to be fountains when the mall first opened, but today they're obviously not running. And those lamps are original. Those are the lamps that the mall shipped with when it was opened back in 1979. How amazing are those? They're so cool, they're so retro. And right here, this is my favorite spot, hands down, of any mall. The dark tones, everything, it's just, I don't know, it's just so cool. Right now we're behind the tarp, and we're getting our first glimpse at the Montgomery Ward wing. We will get in there, and I'll show you everything there is to see there. But just look how awesome that is. Such a grand view. And there's just nothing there now. There's nothing in the food court. Sears is closed, Montgomery Ward is closed. There's nothing there. This footage was captured at the inaugural Dead Malls of Discord Summit in 2018. Tons of people showed up, it was an amazing event, and we are planning another summit for 2019, for which the invitees have already received their invitations, and it is a closed event. So unfortunately at this point, we can't accept any more participants. But if you join the Discord with the link below, you will catch wind of the 2020 summit, which is going to be huge. So in here, Jack Thomas led the expedition to see the Montgomery Ward concourse, which at the time was being used by Netflix for the series Mindhunter. You'll see some fabricated storefronts built for the show with props strewn about. For instance, this gold mine. I'm not sure what this storefront is, but it has this duck hunt game here, and I couldn't imagine that this is original. It might be. If you were at this mall back in the day and you saw that here, let me know. But I don't know if this is original or not. But for instance, you'll see a Walden Books, and there's a music shop that used to be a pet store. Some really cool stuff that you'll see in here. There's a ton of old scarring inside of these storefronts, especially in the back. You'll see here there's some old Eddie J. DeBartolo signage that lists some regulations and rules of the mall from when it was first opened. And a lot of this stuff, I'm sure, is original, and it wasn't included as part of the Mindhunter set, nor was it fabricated, so we're seeing original stuff here. But right now we're inside of this storefront that signage exists, proving that it was either an Orange Julius for filming or during the mall's lifetime. So I'm not sure if this was an Orange Julius just for the film or if it was there before. If you guys can let me know in the comments below if this was actually an Orange Julius, that would be really cool to find out. I wanted to take a peek inside of the Montgomery Ward, but despite there being only one security guard there during the summit, who was incredibly cool with all of us, I didn't want to shine my torch into the windows because I didn't know if maybe we would trip anything off or who knows what, but I was just being cautious here. I really don't think there was anything inside the wards. I think it was just empty. I really don't think they plan to reuse that store. So yeah, I didn't get a closer look inside of there. I just didn't want my torch drawing attention because there was a homeless person that was using this mall as their home until they left, and I didn't want to draw any unnecessary attention. Especially since we had the summit there and I was somewhat responsible for other people, and I just wanted to keep everything safe. Earlier in the episode, we talked a bit about how malls came about, from the marketplaces in the very early ages in ancient Rome. Then we had the marketplaces in France opening, and then we had the arcades opening, which gave way to department stores. In the 19th century, the world was burgeoning with urban expansion, and most notably in Paris, France. With new arcades opening around Europe, and even in the US, with what are arguably the two oldest shopping centers in the country. Rhode Island, with the arcade in Providence in 1828, and Ohio, with the Cleveland Arcade in 1890. The idea of a vast interior shopping center was gaining traction around the world. This intense expansion of commerce was causing social waves among the classes, and philosophers were beginning to take notice of a new type of urban figure who reveled in the details of architecture and observing the less traveled paths in a city and within buildings. This new urban figure was coined by Charles Beaudelaire in Les Fleurs du Mal, or The Flowers of Evil, and refers to somebody who observes a newly industrialized city and its structures while just taking a walk pondering the philosophical implications of what these new passages and arcades have on society, and looking for the secrets that common passersby would otherwise miss. The urban figure that Charles Beaudelaire coined is called Le Flaneur, or pronounced with an American accent butchering the French, Le Flaneur, spelled F-L-A with an accent, N-E-U-R, Le Flaneur. And this is what I believe led the way for urban explorers in our modern times. I have no idea what the room that we're about to go into used to be. The smell of mold was so overwhelming, and it was really tough to stay in here for a long period of time. And there was broken glass everywhere. Everywhere. Every step you took, it was crunchy, and I thought that it was just piercing through my boots. Luckily, it didn't. But this carpet is amazing. It reminds me of the red carpet that used to be all over Century 3. Obviously, this is more orange. And this room has a throne for, I guess, the king of Century 3. I don't know. Century 3 royalty? Or maybe the security guard just used it to feel important sometimes. But that room was disgusting. I'm pretty certain that this Walden Books was fabricated for the Netflix show Mindhunter when they were filming here. It has a lot of fake books that have blank pages and fake signage and stuff. It's fascinating, it's super cool. For the most part, everything in there is fake. But check out that carpet. I don't know what this used to be, maybe like an arcade or something, or some children's store, but this is totally a fake Walden Books. This storefront was pretty cool, and I'm pretty sure that this was used for filming in Mindhunter. But as we go towards the back, you'll see that there's fish tanks and stuff. I think this might have been a pet store. And as we venture further back, you'll see these little stalls that have half doors. And I think those are for when you want to purchase a puppy or a kitten or something. That's where you can meet the puppy or kitten and play with it before purchasing it. This whole place was just super cool. I was afraid that I was going to find like fish bones or something in there. I didn't see any though. So now we're back at the first floor of the mall near the Old Mexico. And recently, this was the last area to be closed off to the public.
How you doing, Sarge? Okay, folks, what'll it be? What would you like, sweetheart?
A Pepsi, please.
Sorry, we only have Coke. Now you've done it.
Sorry? Not half as sorry as you're gonna be. I ordered a Pepsi, pal.
She's got a mind of her own.
What's with this guy?
Look, I just thought...
You thought? What you really thought was that I don't know the difference between Pepsi and a Coke, right?
Here's your Pepsi.
Thank you.
Kids say the darndest things.
What are you looking at?
I like this place.
So I'm always going to err on the side of caution, err on the side of caution, which is why my primary format is going to be walkthroughs with, you know, the occasional whatever I find to be interesting. If you like your cobwebs, your little insects, your gross bags filled with brown shit just dangling from a tree limb. Tell me about Scuffle. Yeah, you saw it, never mind. I'll shut the up. Man.
We're currently looking at where the Grand Carousel once stood. It was a gorgeous carousel that was a double-decker, and in my Part 1 episode, you can see the carousel. But at this time, it seems the carousel is out of service, and you can no longer access it. I'm sure Moonbeam is going to fix it soon, just like all the rest of the problems with this beautiful mall. Just to the left of me right now is where the New Dimensions comic book shop is. I didn't film it because it looked like the store owners were giving me a scowl every time I'd walk by, and I didn't want to disrupt their day. But it's a pretty neat comic book shop, and they're pretty adamant about staying in this mall, so I guess they have that going for them. In the French language, the verb flâner means to stroll. Le flaneur, or a stroller, is someone that wants to discover the secrets of public passageways, arcades, tunnels, backstage areas, and the like, and to see what the general public might never notice. Le flaneur might take a walk over a bridge just to notice the overlooked complexities of the rivets, or service passages, or perhaps to explore the underground passages just to feel the heat emanating from the abundance of gas lamps in the city. The idea of le flaneur took hold of Paris so strongly that flâneurie involved trying to make a serious profession out of the casual occupation of looking at things people never notice in their daily travels. Impressionist painters such as Monet, Degas, Caillebotte, and Renoir were in awe of this philosophy and portrayed le flaneur as the spectator in their work. Examples include Gustave Caillebotte's painting of a man on a balcony looking out of a window, but rather than the view of what the man is seeing, you see the man. the man's pose, an orange velvet upholstered chair, and the marble guard just past the window. The idea is that you are now the spectator, gaining an intimate view of something you wouldn't otherwise see. We don't see the man's face or what he sees because he's not the focal point of the composition. The idea of spectating is the focal point. Edgar Degas would often paint the backstage areas of performing arts centers to show the public what they aren't seeing when they watch a performance. Claude Monet would carry his easel into the end of a train station behind the wooden rails to paint a view generally not seen by passengers. These, in my opinion, were the first urban explorers, and they brought the idea of preserving a scene for purposes of exposure and archival to mainstream audiences. These people were exploring places that passersby would never see, and they were painting these places. They were capturing that moment and showing other people what they aren't noticing in their daily travels. How fascinating is that? That these people were going out and doing urban exploration well before this ever became a popular thing. And now their art is selling for millions. Just before World War II, German Jewish philosopher Walter Benjamin wrote that the Flaneur was the symbol of modernity, strolling into urban life. The city wanderer, sifting through the crowd toward the arcades, where commodities were arranged, sparkling and new, behind the glass. According to Benjamin, the Flaneur came to rise because of the urban expansion and change in socio-economic tendencies in Paris. This change, which was rooted in budding capitalism, involved the creation of the arcades, which again were the passageways through neighborhoods which had been covered with a glass roof and braced by marble panels, so as to create a sort of interior-exterior for vending purposes. Charles Beaudelaire states, quote, "These passages were lined with the most elegant shops, so that such an arcade is a city, even a world in miniature." Close quote. He then goes on to further describe daily activities of this new social figure. Quote, "Within these arcades, the flaneur is capable of finding a remedy for the ever-threatening ennui or boredom of everyday life. He is able to stroll at leisure. One might even go to the extreme of allowing a pet turtle to set his pace, observing the people, the building facades, the objects for sale, entertaining and enriching his mind with the secret language of the city." Close quote. I found it really sad to be inside this JCPenney, which was around Christmas time, and it was packed. People were in and out, and the decorations were gorgeous in there. But then as you turn and you leave the warmth of that department store, the mall just is so cold and desolate and just heartbreaking because there's nothing happening in there. It was right at Christmas, And at one point, I can just imagine children all over the place looking inside the storefronts and the parents buying gifts for everyone. And it's a shell of a time that was a lot more beautiful than this mall is going through right now. Walter Benjamin laments on the extinction of the Flaneur, who disappeared as the commercial world slowly deserted the interior exteriors of arcades for the carpeted, artificially lit department stores that were to replace them. Charles Beaudelaire went on to say, quote, "If in the beginning the street had become an interior for Le Flaneur, now this interior turned into a street, and he roamed through the labyrinth of merchandise as he had once roamed through the labyrinth of the city." Close quote. Where once the Flaneur was exploring the depths of an arcade, they were now bound to the artificiality of department stores, which dulled the senses and forced a sense of commercialism that turned the pioneer urban explorers off. Malls, arcades, enclosed marketplaces, and the like were built to be functionally and aesthetically pleasing. Malls were constructed as a way for someone to be sheltered from the elements, while finding comfort among storefronts, forested courtyards, warm lighting, and the faint rumble of rushing water, smelling of chlorine, and slightly of fried food from the food court. Here you have an aerial view of the Century 3 carousel, but again, you can't access it right now because they have benches in front of it. I miss that carousel. As these mammoth structures began falling and disappearing, the same notion of Le Flaneur captured the minds of modern-day urban explorers. These falling structures were something that the public would no longer see because they were being demolished and removed from our everyday lives. Like the Impressionist painters in the 1800s, we felt an urge to capture their last moments, or moments that society either forgot about or will never see again, to preserve what once was for future generations. While the Flaneur was the rise of interest in seeing these places, Le Flaneur gave rise to the Impressionists who went out and found places of interest that nobody saw and painted those things so that we can see them. Their senses were then dulled by the artificial department stores, which were just bland and bleached out inside, until you got stores like Wanamaker's and such, which were gorgeous. But for the most part, in the rural sections of the world, the department stores were pretty boring, and the Flaneur didn't want to see it anymore. But once these places started crumbling and growing mold and trees inside of the mall where the carpet was, this was a wholly fascinating experience, and a cathartic one too, because as the urban explorers were seeing these things, the mall was closed, the department store was closed, and nobody would see it. So they began capturing these events as the Impressionists did back in the 1800s and showed the public because it was fascinating. The pedigree of modern-day urban explorers, in summation, comes from the idea of the Flaneur and the urban expansion in the 19th century. Urban explorers get their roots from the Flaneur and the Impressionist painters of the 1800s. That's just my opinion, and that's what I've kind of come up with after thinking about this for a long, long time. So in the comments, let me know what you think of that idea. Go look it up. Look up the idea of Le Flaneur. Go look at the paintings of Degas, Renoir, Monet, Caillebotte. Go look at all these things and tell me what you guys think. In January of 2019, it was reported that aside from JCPenney and Dick's Sporting Goods, the only remaining inline tenants were New Dimensions Comics, that massage place which had a tarp up with a little sign that says we're still open, 2 nail salons, Life Uniforms, Century 3 Travel, and that vape shop. The vape shop has since announced its departure along with Life Uniforms. And the massage place, pretty much you had to just flip a coin on whether or not it was open that particular day. And Century 3 Travel was open sporadically. Then in the beginning of February of 2019, there was a burst water main for a second time, but this time affected New Dimensions Comics. Water was gushing inside the store, and reports state that the mall manager was helping the comic shop staff move stock away from the back of the store to avoid water damage. While working to protect the stock, and while carrying a folding table amidst the spouting water, the table is reported to have collapsed, and some ceiling tiles fell simultaneously, and the mall manager suffered a leg injury, for which stitches were administered. The manager is expected to make a complete recovery. However, just a couple of days later, on February 6th, the West Mifflin Borough slapped signs on the front of Century 3 which read, quote, "Unsafe and uninhabitable structure. This structure is unsafe and uninhabitable," close quote. And that the signs will stay and closure effective until the mall is repaired, vacated, or demolished in accordance with the notice.
Special delivery for Jenny! Special delivery for Jenny!
Oh, come on in, Mick. Just set it right down there on the counter.
Nice package. Congratulations, Jenny.
You remember the magic bullet, right?
All right, magic bullet margaritas.
Tell me, Grandma. This is cute. I've never seen anything like this before.
Are we doing shots?
No, Grandma. This is the baby bullet to-go bag. And inside are these easy store compartments for all the pieces of the baby bullets. So whether you're going out for an afternoon or let's say an overnighter at Grandma's house, look you guys, it does.
Breaking news now, Century 3 Mall has been shut down. Signs posted on the doors that say it's uninhabitable.
And so what forced officials to close the mall? Ralph Fl&acirc is asking that question, and he is live reporting tonight. Ralph.
Thanks very much, Susan. Tonight, trouble piling up for Century 3 Mall. Century 3 Mall behind me here in West Mifflin. Now, earlier today, a West Mifflin code enforcement officer posted notices on mall entrances saying the mall was unsafe and uninhabitable. He said the building must be repaired, vacated, or demolished. The reason, according to West Mifflin,
This last bit of footage was shot on the last day of the inaugural summit, and it was getting dark. At this point, we've seen everything there is to see in the mall. So we decided to jump back in and just grab a little bit more footage just to make sure we didn't miss anything. And despite the natural light being this mall's main source of lighting, even when it's getting dark outside, the mall is still gorgeous inside.
Shame on you, Charles Beaudelaire. It's time for you to grab your hat, coat, and leave. Let us do the right thing for our residents. Now, Century 3 Mall opened in 1979, some 40 years ago, and at one point they had some 200 stores.
There's the sign.
7 that doesn't are still open here. No word tonight on what stores may be open tomorrow, except for those main acres that I told you about. We're live tonight.
There's hope yet for Century 3, however. On February 7th, one day after the signs were put on the front saying that it was uninhabitable, Moonbeam was granted the ability to borrow $5 million from Columbia Place Mall South Carolina LLC, which they also own. Moonbeam states that they'll use this money for repairs to the mall. And as of February 10th, 2019, Moonbeam officials were on site with contractors actually working on repairs. The repairs needed were due to the heating and the fire sprinkler systems not functioning properly, which are both pretty important. It is possible that the mall can survive, as the two anchors are still operating along with the comic book shop, who plans to actually host the Comic-Con in May. But Moonbeam still has some legal trouble, as they're currently facing litigation for the first water main break, and they owe the cleanup company over $800,000, which they're fighting in court. On top of the first cleanup bill, and the newly borrowed $5 million, which they're paying 3% interest on, they still owe Sears $4.2 million after failing to buy back the department store location when Sears terminated the lease early. The mall is currently atop shifting slag and in extremis. The mall is at its point of death, and Moonbeam has an incredible battle ahead of them if they are to save it. Only time will tell. This channel has come such a long way in just over a year for the Expedition Log series. The community engagement has been incredible. You guys leave such incredible comments and stories and insight into things that I might not have known about these places. The Dead Malls of Discord family is a wonderful group of people, and the Discord is lively all through the day. And again, if you haven't joined, please do join. I'd like to thank all of you for nearly 16,000 subscribers at this point, so thank you so much. And there's a ton more content coming. We've got one summit under our belt and another one coming up very soon, and more in the future, and I can't wait to grow even further with all of you guys. So stay tuned for a ton more content and even more exciting locations. Thanks again, everybody. Take care.